What would you do if the person you loved most looked you straight in the eye and said, "Your happiness isn't my problem"? I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just watched as my wife slipped out the door night after night, until I decided I'd stop waiting for her to come back. And when she did, it was already too late. Stick around. You'll want to see how this ends. Eric never thought indifference could hurt more than anger. For years, he believed marriage ended with slammed doors or screaming matches. Something loud, something you could point to as proof it was broken. But the end began on a quiet Tuesday when he came home soaked from a job site, carrying the kind of exhaustion only long shifts and thankless work can carve into a man. He walked in hoping for one small kindness. A word, a look, any sign Jenna still cared. She was on the couch, phone glowing in her hands, thumbs moving fast. He started telling her about his day. How the rain made every call take twice as long. How he nearly slipped climbing out of an attic. How his boss tacked on another emergency repair when Eric was already late getting home. He didn't expect a solution, just a little empathy. But she didn't look up, didn't even pause her scrolling. And when he finally stopped talking, waiting for some acknowledgement, she gave a small shrug and said, almost absently, "Your happiness isn't my problem." There was no edge in her voice, no anger. It was just a statement, casual, like she was talking about the weather. Eric stood there for a moment, unsure he'd heard right. "Excuse me?" he asked, voice low, more surprised than hurt. She sighed, finally meeting his eyes. "What? It's not. I didn't mean anything by it." She went back to her phone. That was when Eric felt something slip. He didn't even feel angry, just oddly weightless, like the ground under him had shifted half an inch to the left. He poured himself a glass of water he didn't need, just to have something to do with his hands. He looked at her through the doorway, remembering the early years, how she'd meet him at the door, how they'd stay up too late talking about where they'd travel someday. Now she could barely look at him. He knew they'd been drifting. The distance had crept in slowly, disguised as long hours, tired excuses, and nights spent staring at different screens. But hearing her say it so plainly, that was the moment he realized he'd been fighting alone. He didn't respond. He just let the silence settle. That weekend, Jenna left again. She tossed her keys in the dish by the door, slipped her purse over her shoulder, and said she needed air. No explanation, no invitation to join her, no return time. It became routine. Every few nights, she'd repeat the same line. Eric stopped asking where she was going because he already knew the answer was nowhere she'd admit. He noticed the little changes first. She started dressing up more. Not for him, he hadn't been part of her plans for months. Her laughter returned, but only when her phone buzzed. She never laughed like that in his presence anymore. Eric wasn't naive. He knew there was someone else. It didn't take evidence, though evidence came anyway. He caught glimpses. A name he didn't recognize flashing on her phone. A receipt left in her bag for a place she used to swear she'd never go without him. Still, he didn't confront her. He knew if he started that fight, it would only end with her saying he was imagining things or being controlling. He wasn't ready to watch her lie to his face, so he wrote things down. Not as a weapon, just as proof he hadn't made it all up. Times she came home, what she wore, the way her mood shifted after every disappearing act. He told himself he was collecting facts to make sense of it. But deep down, he knew no list would fix what had already rotted. One Thursday, the truth arrived without invitation. Eric was scrolling his phone, killing time until he fell asleep in an empty bed. A video popped up from a nightclub downtown, a friend of a friend live-streaming the dance floor. He almost swiped past it. Then he saw her, Jenna, laughing, spinning under the arm of a man he'd never seen. Her head tipped back, her whole body alive in a way it hadn't been in years. She wasn't just out. She was happy, free. Eric stared at the screen. The music pounded through cheap speakers, and he watched the man lean down, whisper something in Jenna's ear, watched her lean in close as if she'd forgotten she belonged to another life. He didn't call, didn't text. He didn't even feel anger in that moment, only clarity. When she finally returned home hours later, her steps soft across the living room, he pretended to be asleep. She paused near the couch, like she was about to say something, then walked on. The next morning, Eric got up before dawn. He made coffee, packed his lunch, and left without waking her. On the drive to work, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Focus. If she wanted freedom, she could have it. But it wouldn't be cheap and it wouldn't be painless. From that day on, Eric stopped waiting for Jenna to come back. He knew he wasn't the same man she'd married. He was different now. Quieter, more deliberate, and ready to do something he once thought impossible. Let go. Eric thought the hardest part would be watching Jenna walk out the door over and over again. But he was wrong. The hardest part was realizing he didn't care enough to stop her anymore. After that night he saw her dancing, he stopped pretending they were only going through a rough patch. He knew exactly what it was, the slow dismantling of their life together. And he refused to keep propping up a house she'd already left in spirit. She still tried to keep up appearances. The first few days after, she acted like nothing had happened. She asked if he'd seen the mail, if he wanted her to grab groceries, if he'd remembered to call his mom. Her voice was calm, her expression neutral, as if the marriage was fine as long as no one acknowledged it was already over. Eric didn't engage. He answered only when necessary and never asked where she'd been. When she slipped out at night, he didn't look up from whatever he was doing. He started taking small steps to prepare. He checked their accounts and set up his own online banking. He gathered receipts, noting the new restaurants and hotel charges she never mentioned. He met with a lawyer after work one evening, sitting in a plain office under fluorescent lights, while the attorney explained options in a voice that was steady and somehow comforting. That meeting didn't feel dramatic. It felt like maintenance, like changing the oil in a car that would soon be sold. At home, Jenna's patterns didn't change. She came and went as she pleased. But when she returned, she sometimes hovered by the doorway, as if hoping he'd look up, question her, or even shout. Anything to break the quiet. Eric refused to give her that. He knew she was waiting for him to react so she could feel justified in leaving for good. Instead, he forced her to sit with her own choices. A week later, on a rainy Saturday morning, she tried again to pretend it was business as usual. She made coffee and set a mug down in front of him without asking. When he didn't touch it, she frowned and slid into the chair across from him. "You okay?" she asked, studying him like she was searching for some crack in his calm. "I'm fine," he said, and he was. Jenna's eyes moved across the table to the neatly stacked envelopes and forms he'd left out. Divorce papers he hadn't signed yet but was ready to if she forced the issue. Her gaze lingered there for a moment, then returned to his face. "You've been quiet," she said, voice lower. He met her stare without flinching. "So have you." A flush crept into her cheeks, and she looked away. She stood, muttering something about needing fresh air, and left without another word. This time he didn't watch her go. In the days that followed, the tension built like pressure behind a dam. Jenna stopped making any effort to pretend she was happy. She started pacing the house, restless and irritated. She snapped at small things. A missing charger, an unpaid bill, the way he folded the towels. Once, she came home and found him reading on the porch. She paused in the doorway, searching his expression for something. He looked up briefly, nodded, and turned the page. "You don't even care, do you?" she asked, her voice cracking just enough to betray that she wanted him to say otherwise. He closed the book slowly, setting it aside. "Not anymore," he replied. Her mouth fell open, but no words came. After a few seconds, she turned and walked back to the car, slamming the door behind her. Eric sat there listening to the engine fade down the street. He felt no satisfaction, only a strange relief that he'd finally stopped lying to himself. The next morning, he started removing her things from the shared closet, carefully, without malice. Just sorting what was his and what she'd take with her when she finally admitted she wasn't coming back. He boxed up old photos, wedding gifts they never used, mementos that meant nothing anymore. While he worked, Jenna came home early. She stood in the doorway, staring at the boxes. Her face was pale, her mouth set in a tight line. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Making space," Eric said simply. For what? For whatever comes next. She opened her mouth, closed it, then stepped aside so he could carry another box past her. That evening, she tried a different approach. Instead of leaving, she made dinner. She set the table for two, lighting a candle they'd received as a wedding gift and never used. He didn't say a word when she placed a plate in front of him. They ate in near silence, the clink of silverware the only sound between them. Halfway through, she looked up. I don't know when we stopped trying, she said quietly. Eric didn't answer, because he did know. It was the moment she decided her own freedom mattered more than their commitment. Jenna swallowed, looking down at her hands. I needed space. He nodded slowly. And you found it. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I know. She didn't push further. Maybe she realized he wasn't going to save her from the consequences. For the first time in months, Eric slept through the night. No tossing, no wondering when she'd come home. When he woke up, she was already gone again. The next day, she tried to call him at work. He let it ring. When she texted, he didn't reply. He'd given her all the chances he could stomach. By the end of the week, Jenna started showing signs she was losing control over her own narrative. She stopped going out as often. She hovered around him, lingering in doorways, folding laundry she used to ignore. Once, he caught her staring at him while he read, like she was trying to memorize his expression. He didn't let himself feel pity. He remembered the man on the dance floor, the way her laughter sounded when she thought he'd never find out. And he remembered the look on her face when she told him his happiness wasn't her problem. So when she started asking careful, testing questions, did you eat yet? Are you working late tomorrow? He answered plainly but didn't offer more. If she wanted to rebuild, she'd have to face the truth she tried to outrun. And Eric, for the first time, was no longer afraid to let her. It was a Tuesday when Jenna's avoidance finally broke under its own weight. Eric had come home later than usual, tired from a job that had stretched past dark. He walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, her hands folded tightly, as if she'd been waiting there for hours. He set down his bag and nodded at her. She didn't look away. We need to talk, she said. Eric didn't respond right away. He took off his jacket and hung it by the door, every movement unhurried. Only then did he sit across from her. Talk, he said evenly. She swallowed, her gaze dropping to the table. I know things have been bad. He didn't argue. I've been thinking about everything, she went on. About us, about what I've done. Her voice trembled at the last word, and for the first time, he saw something real crack through the calm front she'd been holding. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered. I thought I just needed space to figure out who I was. Eric held her stare. And did you? Jenna opened her mouth but no answer came. Instead, her eyes began to fill. She pressed her lips together, trying to keep herself steady. I'm sorry, she said finally. For everything. For leaving you alone. For acting like I didn't care. Eric didn't flinch. He'd imagined this moment many times. Her confession, her regret. But now that it was here, it felt smaller than he expected. You said my happiness wasn't your problem, he said quietly. She nodded, her chin lowering. I know. I was wrong. He waited, giving her space to keep going. I was selfish, she admitted, voice low. I thought if I ignored what was happening, it would fix itself. I thought you'd always be here no matter how I treated you. Eric leaned back, studying her carefully. You were sure I wouldn't leave. Jenna swallowed again. Yes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was different this time. Not empty, final. Then she took a long, shaky breath. I want to try again, she said. I want to fix this. If you'll let me. Eric looked past her, letting the weight of her words settle. He thought about the nights she'd slipped out without explanation, the way her laughter sounded in that video, the name on her phone when she thought he wouldn't see it. He thought about all the times he'd wondered what he'd done to deserve her indifference. And then, slowly, he shook his head. I don't think you understand what you've broken, he said. Her face crumpled. I'm trying, Eric. I'm standing here telling you I'm sorry. And I hear you, he said calmly. But you're not sorry for the right things. She looked up, confusion flickering across her features. What do you mean? You're sorry because you lost control, he said. You're sorry because I stopped chasing you. You're not sorry for the nights you chose someone else. Her eyes widened. He held up a hand. Don't lie to me. Her shoulders slumped. For a long moment, she just stared at the table. I didn't mean to. But you did, he interrupted. She wiped her face with her palm. I don't know how to fix it. Eric nodded slowly. That's the first honest thing you've said. She looked at him, her mouth opening as if she had something else prepared. But no words came. Finally, she stood. I'm going to bed, she whispered. He watched her go without saying another word. The next day, Jenna didn't leave the house. Instead, she moved from room to room, cleaning, organizing, doing anything to look busy. When Eric came home, she tried to start small talk, questions about work, about errands. He answered only when necessary. That evening, she waited until he finished dinner to try again. I know you don't believe me, she said softly, but I'm done with him. Eric didn't ask who she meant. He already knew. I don't expect you to forgive me, she went on. I just need you to know I'm serious. I want to fix this. He studied her for a long time, then looked away. You can't fix something you don't respect, he said. Her eyes filled again, but she didn't argue. That night, she stayed in the guest room. He heard her crying through the thin walls but didn't go to her. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was what closure looked like. The next morning, he left early. He drove to a small cafe near his work and sat alone with a cup of black coffee. He thought about who he'd become, someone who didn't need to be needed, someone who could finally accept the truth without trying to soften it. When he got home, Jenna was sitting at the kitchen table again. This time, she didn't look up when he entered. I called your sister, she said after a long moment. I told her everything. He didn't reply. She said I should leave, she continued quietly. That you deserve better. Eric leaned against the counter, folding his arms. She's right. Jenna nodded. I know. For the first time, there was no argument in her voice. No deflection, no performance. I don't want to go, she admitted. But I will if you ask me to. He exhaled slowly. I'm not going to ask. She looked up sharply. Why? Because it's your decision, he said. And because I'm not going to carry this for you anymore. She blinked, and tears slid down her cheeks. I don't know who I am without you, she whispered. Eric's voice was steady. That's something you'll have to figure out. Jenna didn't speak again. She stood slowly, picked up her keys and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob as if waiting for him to stop her. He didn't. When the door closed behind her, Eric sat down in the chair she'd just vacated. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel oppressive. Felt honest. He realized he'd never needed her to admit everything. He just needed her to stop pretending it hadn't happened. And now that she had, he felt something close to relief. The days after Jenna walked out were not as final as Eric expected. She didn't vanish. Instead, she returned every evening, as if she was testing whether he would tell her not to come back. But he never asked her to leave. He didn't tell her to stay either. He simply moved around her like she was a guest who hadn't figured out she'd overstayed. Jenna tried everything she could think of to close the distance she'd created. She stopped going out at night. She stopped dressing up. She stayed home, waiting for any chance to prove she could still be the woman Eric once trusted. She started cooking again. She folded his laundry without being asked. She offered to help with bills. She tried to make plans for them, suggested dinner at a place they used to love, mentioned a movie they'd once talked about seeing. Eric listened, nodded when appropriate but never agreed to anything. He didn't feel the need to explain why. He'd spent enough time explaining himself to someone who'd never really been listening. On a Thursday evening, Jenna approached him while he was cleaning up in the garage. She stood in the doorway, her hands twisting around each other. I know you're done with me, she began, but I need you to hear this. Eric didn't stop what he was doing, but he didn't tell her to leave. I was selfish, she continued. I thought you'd never stop caring. I thought no matter what I did, you'd always be here waiting for me to get over myself. He didn't look at her, but he could hear the strain in her voice. I can't take back what I did, she said, voice cracking. But I need you to believe that I regret it. Eric placed the last tool back on its shelf before turning to face her. I believe you regret losing control, he said quietly. Not what you did. Jenna swallowed, her eyes welling again. I regret everything, she whispered. He shook his head. If you really did, you wouldn't have kept lying until you had no other choice. She looked away, blinking fast. I was scared, she said. So was I, Eric replied. But I didn't run. That was the difference. She couldn't argue it, and she didn't try. The next morning, she was gone before he woke up. He didn't wonder where she was. He didn't wait for her to come back. He went about his day as if he lived alone, because in every way that mattered, he already did. It was later that evening, after he returned from work, that Jenna tried one last time to change his mind. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes in front of her. When he came in, she looked up quickly. I went through the bills, she said. I want to help pay them. Eric set down his keys, glancing at her but saying nothing. I've been talking to a recruiter, she continued. I'm going to start working again. He nodded once. Good. She hesitated. I thought maybe, if I showed you I'm trying, we could start over. Eric studied her for a moment. He searched for the resentment he thought he'd feel. But there was none left. Just a dull acceptance that she was only doing this because she was afraid of what came next. Trying doesn't erase what you did, he said. Her face fell. I know, but doesn't it matter at all? He considered the question. For a long time he thought it might. He thought if she admitted everything, if she proved she was sorry, maybe they'd find a way back. But he didn't feel that anymore. It matters, he said finally. Just not enough. Her shoulders slumped. So that's it. That's it, Eric replied. She looked down at the envelopes, her fingers tracing the edge of one absent-mindedly. I don't know where to go, she whispered. He felt a flicker of pity, brief but genuine. You'll figure it out. Jenna nodded slowly, as if she knew that was all she would get. For the next few days, she stayed in the house but kept her distance. She moved quietly, her eyes avoiding his. She didn't try to start conversations anymore. She didn't offer to make meals or fold laundry. She seemed to understand that every effort to pretend nothing had happened only made the truth clearer. Eric started packing up what he knew he'd take with him. He boxed his books, his tools, the things he didn't want left behind when the paperwork was final. One evening, Jenna finally spoke again. She found him in the living room, sealing up a box. I told my parents, she said, voice unsteady, about everything. He looked up but didn't reply. They said I should come home, she continued, at least until I figure things out. That's probably best, Eric said. Jenna shifted her weight, like she was hoping he'd contradict her. When he didn't, she took a shaky breath. I never thought this would happen, she admitted. He set the tape aside. Neither did I. Is there really nothing I can do? She asked. He met her eyes evenly. No. She nodded, her throat working as she swallowed. I'm sorry, she said again. I know. That night, Jenna slept in the guest room. In the morning, she didn't come out to say goodbye. Eric left without seeing her. He didn't check his phone for any messages. He didn't expect any. He felt lighter, though not in any triumphant way. It was more like finally setting down something heavy he'd been carrying for too long. Later that afternoon, as he was sorting through his email, he saw the message from his lawyer, confirming that the paperwork was ready for signatures. He read it twice, feeling no panic, no grief, only relief that the ending was almost official. When he got home, Jenna was in the kitchen again. She looked up as he came in and straightened, as if preparing herself. I'll be leaving tomorrow, she said quietly. He nodded. All right. She hesitated. Do you want to go over the details? No, he said. You have everything you need. For the first time, she didn't argue. She only lowered her gaze and nodded once. That evening, the house was quieter than it had ever been. There was no tension left, no anticipation of another fight or apology. Just the final, simple truth. They were done. And Eric, sitting alone in the living room, knew he wasn't afraid of whatever came next. The morning Jenna left, Eric woke up before sunrise. He didn't rush to get ready. There was no point in pretending this was an ordinary day. He sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, listening to the quiet. For once, it didn't feel oppressive. It felt clean, like the house itself was relieved to stop holding their shared disappointments. Jenna came down the hallway slowly, carrying a single suitcase. She didn't look like someone who wanted to fight anymore. She paused by the doorway, her hand resting on the handle of her bag. "I'm going to my parents' place," she said, her voice steady. Eric nodded. She swallowed. "I'm not sure when I'll be back in town. If you need anything, you can still call me." He studied her for a moment. There had been a time when he would have clung to that offer, even if it was hollow. But he wasn't that man anymore. "I don't think I will," he said. Jenna looked away, blinking quickly. "I know." For a second, it seemed like she might try to say something more, some final plea to rewrite the last year. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded and pulled the door open. As she stepped outside, Eric stood. He didn't follow her. He didn't watch her walk to the car. He just stood there, feeling the weight in his chest loosen with every second she moved farther away. When the door closed, he let out a long breath. The house was his now, not in name but in spirit. He could decide what stayed and what went. By noon, he had gathered everything of hers into a single room, out of sight. He didn't feel angry as he worked, just clear. Every folded shirt and stray mug was one less reminder of the woman who had taught him that sometimes love wasn't enough. That afternoon, he met with his lawyer to sign the final papers. It was a quiet process. No arguments, no delays. Just two adults acknowledging that whatever they'd built together couldn't be saved. On the drive home, he thought about how different this ending was from the ones he'd imagined. There were no dramatic confrontations, no screaming, no begging, just the slow, undeniable understanding that some breaks couldn't be repaired. He knew people would have opinions. They'd say he was too harsh, that he should have tried harder, that he could have forgiven her if he'd wanted to. But those people hadn't lived in his house, hadn't watched the woman he loved slip away night after night, hadn't heard her say that his happiness was none of her concern. Eric didn't feel the need to defend his choices to anyone. That evening, he called his sister. He hadn't told her much during the worst of it, but she'd suspected. When he said, "It's done," there was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. He felt something warm in his chest at that. Not triumph, just a quiet acknowledgement that he had survived it. The next days passed easily. He didn't check his phone waiting for her messages. He didn't wonder if she'd change her mind. He didn't hope she'd show up on the porch with an apology. Instead, he started reclaiming the routines that had been buried under resentment. Early mornings with coffee and the newspaper. Evenings spent working in the garage, fixing things that had been neglected. He found that when he wasn't preoccupied with Jenna's absence, he actually liked the solitude. One Sunday afternoon, Micah texted. He was one of the old friends Jenna had contacted during the unraveling. "Hey man, heard about everything. If you ever want to talk, I'm around." Eric read it twice before replying. "Thanks. I'm okay." He meant it. In the weeks that followed, the final paperwork arrived in the mail. He opened the envelope, signed the last page, and sent it back without ceremony. Afterward, he sat on the back steps and watched the light fade. He didn't feel regret. He felt something closer to relief, a sense that he hadn't failed by letting go. He'd only failed for the years he'd kept pretending it wasn't broken. He thought about all the times he'd asked Jenna to be honest, all the times he'd tried to make her feel something for their marriage. In the end, it wasn't his job to convince her of its worth. It never had been. One evening, he found the card he'd slipped her along with the signed divorce papers. He'd left it to help her start over, a gesture that wasn't about bitterness or revenge, It was about not carrying her burden anymore. Eric never heard whether she used it. He didn't care to find out. The final proof he'd moved on came quietly. He stopped thinking about what she was doing or who she was with. His mind simply stopped returning to her absence. Months later, a friend asked if he'd ever consider dating again. He shrugged and said, "Probably," but there was no urgency in it. No sense that he needed someone else to fill the space she'd left. Because the truth was, that space had never been hers to claim forever. On the day the divorce was officially filed in court, Eric took the afternoon off. He didn't tell anyone why. He didn't mark it with a toast or a ritual. He simply drove to the coast, walked along the edge of the water, and let himself breathe without guilt. He realized he wasn't angry at Jenna anymore. He didn't even wish her ill. He hoped she'd figure out whatever she'd been searching for. But he knew she wouldn't find it in him. Driving home, he thought about how people always described endings as tragedies. But this wasn't one. Sometimes, leaving was the most honest thing you could do for both of you. Eric had finally understood that staying in a love that no longer respected itself wasn't noble. It was just a slow form of surrender. And he was done surrendering.